My name's Angela Knapp, and I'm a textile artist based in the southwest of England in the UK. I come from no background of stitching in any form until I reached my mid-40s. I spent my career in the National Health Service in the UK. I was a radiographer for 20 years, a diagnostic radiographer, and loved my career. But a move to rural Somerset with two young children meant I left my career, and I suddenly was looking for a new challenge. And I'm fortunate enough to live near a shop called Midsummer Quilting, which is more of a community really than a shop. And they held a yearly 12 by 12 challenge, which I'd never come across before. I'd not come across many quilts before, never mind anything art formed. And that was the introduction really to suddenly understanding there was such a thing as an art quilt. And I loved the principle of it because I'd always done watercolours, I'd loved art, but the 20 years in the NHS had sort of knocked any creativity out of me. And suddenly I had this host of colours and patterns, and suddenly you didn't, like with a watercolour painting, have a blank piece of paper, that terrifying blank piece of paper. You could choose a piece of fabric as a background, and suddenly your ideas sparked from it, and I just loved it. And all of a sudden I found my love of art again with my newfound love of fabric and thread. So I had wanted to go to art college, but my father didn't think that was a good idea, and that was back in the time that you listened to your father. And so yes, this has been a very unexpected change in my midlife section. And through that, I have met the most wonderful community of people. I've loved teaching and doing workshops and experienced something I could never have imagined pre the move from the NHS. So it's been absolutely fabulous. All of my inspiration from the word go, before I even knew it was an inspiration, was birds. I've always been very deeply connected to nature. I had pneumonia when I was about 8, and I was off school for a very, very long time. And I was given a pair of binoculars and a notebook, and I just sat and watched birds out of the window. And I've always been obsessed with birds. So I don't experiment really beyond that, other than the backgrounds that I increasingly try and tell stories through. But no, all of my pieces over the last 11 years have all been bird based. And I don't ever see that changing, because increasingly I'm trying to tell the story about the plight of birds in the UK and further. So there's a lot of birds in trouble, and I don't see myself really changing from being a nature-based bird artist. It means an enormous amount. It's that feeling of expression that so many jobs don't allow you to do. I love meeting people. I love engaging with the public and talking about why I've done something. I love the fact they'll see the bird and they'll enjoy looking at the bird, and then they will question why I have chosen other materials or things in the background and what the storytelling I'm trying to do is. And that I adore. I like nothing more than being in the gallery and being able to explain work and engage with the public. So it's a very important part of my life, and it really is who I've become. I feel it's the real me that's gone back to that 16, 18-year-old who wanted to go to art college. I've been lucky enough to experience it later in life. I work in a old converted dairy milking parlour, which is on our land, and it hasn't been a farm for generations before we moved here. So I've still got part of the milking stalls and the feeders, but we've put a wood burner in it for our lovely winter months, and it's full of boxes of fabrics, threads, and enormous amount of bird books. I do all my work on a little Bernina 350, so a very entry-level machine. And increasingly I hand stitch, so I've now got lots of extra threads from that. But I'm pretty basic, and I just love the process rather than the equipment. It's not all about having the best equipment. It does the job really well for me. And I also think when I teach, it's lovely to be able to say to people, you don't need a lot of fancy equipment and expensive bits and bobs. It's more your imagination and how you interpret things. Okay. Every piece I do starts with a photograph. It's really important to me. I'm not abstract in any way. It's really important to me. It looks as accurate as possible, that you feel you could reach out and touch the real bird. So I work from photographs that I don't take, but I've got a lovely collection of photographers around the UK who find birds for me and try and get the perfect shot. And I will then base it on that. So I always start with a photograph. I then do a painting. And from the painting, I then colour block it back. My process is very different now since I've made the Kingfisher piece, but at that stage, I colour blocked it and then I layer different fabrics with Bondaweb. And so it literally looks like the Kingfisher before I start. I'll then paint details and then I start the stitch. So I love every stage of it. I love that build-up stage every bit as much as the stitch stage, really. Once it's, I make them in a hoop, which is always a little bit clunky, but I quite like it for building it up. So I place the finished piece at the Bondaweb stage onto a piece of Aviary, and then I stitch it all with the machine in a hoop. So, and that can take, I'm almost breaking needles towards the end of it, that some of them are so thick. Completely and utterly. I would say the first 8 years, I did them all in the way I made the Kingfisher. But now I tend to hand stitch rather than machine stitch because you can get a lighter touch with that. Trying to do a delicate feather with a machine is far more difficult, and everything gets pushed into the wadding. So my birds I now almost always hand stitch, but I love experimenting with backgrounds. The early days, I'd find a piece of fabric and I'd pop a bird on it, and it was as imaginative as I got. Now I try and tell the story through the background, and the background has become every bit as important now as the bird itself. So also with the birds, I used to use this layered fabric technique. Now I'm more likely to actually paint the bird on a piece of plain fabric and then stitch it. Depending on the size and complexity of the story, the quickest ones I probably would do in 4 weeks. They'd be a small, little, delicate study. More like 3 months for a big piece. I do spend far too long researching. I love the research stage. But I think with that comes a depth of storytelling that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But I would say 3 months. Some have taken longer, but it would be a pretty average time. I I feel confident always in doing the birds. That's such a long ingrained technique, but storytelling, increasingly when I'm trying to tell stories that are pretty negative and can verge on political, I find it quite hard to know where to draw the line from stating just how dreadful the situation is and making a picture sometimes with a background that can be not particularly pleasing or can be uncomfortable to sit with in your sitting space if you buy it. And that's probably the thing I battle with most. I want to be very honest with the story, but it's that pulling it back, which I realize you don't always have to, but I find it a fine line. I find it quite tricky. So that's probably the most difficult thing I struggle with. Kingfishers, you only get the most fleeting view of them. They are very shy birds, and you usually, the sentence is, I think I've just seen a kingfisher. They never, that I have seen, just sit nicely on a branch and allow you to admire it and take in the detail. And also in the UK, we have a lot of what we call LBJs, little brown jobs. There's a lot of brown birds in the UK. We don't have many colourful, showy birds. There's a puffin and the kingfisher, and beyond that you don't get your coloured threads out very much. So it was such a lovely one to do, and so evocative and imaginative, because I'm never going to see a kingfisher just sitting about like that. So it was trying to catch that sort of feeling and portray the beauty of some of the birds in this country. In many ways, it was one of the last pieces I made in this technique. And I really enjoyed the trying to make a 3D lichen on the branch.
Hmm.
And also trying to make the bird that I'd made separately as 3D as possible, so that I sort of captured him being real rather than just forced flat. All of my work goes into behind art glass, usually in a frame. So in many ways, there weren't many techniques in that were that different for me. It was a process of building up to that. And at the end of that stage, I've probably then moved on in a different way. So it was it was like the end of one series of work, but that where I'd captured something I thought really well, a
Hmm.
moment in time, but no specifically unusual techniques in that one compared to more complex pieces later on.
Hmm.
It means an enormous amount that Americans won't probably appreciate, in the sense that it is incredibly difficult to have any fibre art taken seriously in the UK. Really hard. That's why I frame things, because people seem to understand it slightly more if it's in a frame behind glass. Some places do accept fibre art, but generally it is seen as craft, and maybe even women's work, not high art, not art worthy of being in the sort of places that this exhibition is travelling round. That is the stuff of UK dreams. So it is a massive thing that you have selected mine to be in your exhibition, because it just wouldn't happen in this country. So it's incredibly exciting, and it's not anything any UK quilter takes for granted. I think I'd love them to get a sense of peace and tranquility from it. It's a moment in time, but I'd also like it to convey just the beauty of nature, and how at this speed of life that we live, we don't stop and watch and wait and admire. And so much, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but nature is just being pushed to the edges. And we all know how important it is to us, those of us who love watching birds, who being out in nature. We know it is the thing that can help our health, mental and physical. And just, I hope it captures a moment in time of just appreciating nature. Most importantly, give yourself time. You see work in exhibition spaces such as this, and if you're just beginning, you become so self-critical of where you're at, what you're achieving. You don't, and I've been here, I remember feeling this. You think, I'm never going to achieve that. Why can't I reach that level? And you're very self-critical. So it's give yourself time. Most importantly, find your voice. I went on lots of workshops, and workshops are great to a point, apart from the fact you come away and you then copy and replicate, and they stop you from having that space to go, what would I like to do? What story do I want to tell? So I think the most important thing is give yourself time. You've got to learn the techniques, but find your voice, because when you do, you'll be passionate about it, and that will come over in your work. Uh, Increasingly, I have loved backgrounds, and that storytelling behind it. And I've made pieces where I've really tried to challenge myself to do lots of buildings with birds above it that give the idea that the birds are almost removed from this human scale of life. And I did a piece called Congregation where 3 swallows flew above St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And it was an incredibly complicated piece to make. And it was wonderful trying to think of the solution of how to make it and convey that feeling. And also for people to say, I just don't know how you did it. That was lovely, because so much of my work prior to that, it was pretty obvious how I'd made it. And with that sort of technique, I've then taken it on with sort of pieces about the Ukraine and the situation there, putting my bird onto St. Sophia's Cathedral, the building, with old poems in circular text. I love doing text. I absolutely adore free motion text. So it's taking all of those stories, and by doing it in stitch, it engages people in a different way of just being on paper. I think people who don't know about fibre art and don't know how to stitch are drawn into an image, and then they're, wow, it's stitched. And they engage far more deeply than, oh, it's a beautiful watercolour and that's what it's telling me. And I understand that. That makes sense in my head. But the fact that somebody has stitched a picture, particularly in the UK, really makes people stop and think. And the bizarre thing to me still is the majority of people who buy from me or who connect with me are men. That it's, because they're birders and they care about the birds, and I've portrayed it as accurately as possible. And they like the fact I'm trying to tell the story of their plight. So that's been the joy of the journey of it over 11 years.